Code 3, the warrior finds honor in service. The warrior lives in the paradox between service and greatness. I remember years ago when Aaron was around 10 years old, we went to Tokyo, Japan, and fulfilled for me really a lifelong dream. I've always wanted to go to Japan. I've always been incredibly intrigued by Japanese culture, by the code of the samurai, by the life of the Ronin. And I remember we went to this ancient restored home of Ronin, and there was an unusual entry. The doors did not go all the way to the ground, nor did they go high enough where you could walk into their house standing still or standing up, right? And when you walked in, you had to raise your leg to step in, and you had to lower your head to step in. And the guide who was walking us through explained to us that the reason this was the way into the house of a Ronin is that you had to enter the house by placing your head in such a position of vulnerability that the Ronin, if he considered you a threat, could literally decapitate you in that moment. It's a stark imagery, but it was a powerful imagery of the culture of service and humility and honor. I was always intrigued that the word samurai and the word deacon are translated the same word. They both mean servant. To be a deacon means to be a servant. To be a samurai means to be a servant. And then when you look at the central narrative of the life of Jesus, it tells us in the scriptures, in the Gospel of John, that when Jesus knew that all power had been placed under his authority, that the very first thing Jesus did was put a towel around his waist and wash his disciples' feet. If nothing else will help you understand the contrast between who Jesus is and who we are, is that when Jesus knew he had all power, he used that power to serve. Throughout human history, whenever people had power to use and to use it without restraint, it has pretty much always gone bad. It seems that power cannot be trusted in the hands of men. In fact, there's this interesting statement that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, as popular as that statement is, it is absolutely wrong. Absolute power does not corrupt absolutely. What absolute power does is reveal absolutely. Absolute power reveals absolutely. Power doesn't corrupt that which isn't corrupt. Power reveals that which is corrupt. One of the ways I know this is that the only one who has absolute power is God. God has absolute power and he is uncorruptible. Jesus had absolute power and he chose to serve. He was not corrupted by absolute power. He was revealed by absolute power. When Jesus had absolute power in his hands, he chose to save the world. Jesus used his power to serve. He did not use his power to overpower. He used his power to empower. Who else in human history could ever claim this? To have unlimited power and to use that power to completely serve others. It's quite a standard, really, when you think about it. Jesus basically said to his disciples, the Son of Man has come to serve. He's telling them, I'm your leader. I'm the greatest among us, and I am here to serve. And if serving is not beneath me, then explain to me why you would think serving would ever be beneath you. There's no one who ever enters the movement of Jesus, no one who can ever claim that Jesus is their Lord, who uses their power to overpower, who uses their power for their own self-benefit. If you are a reflection of Jesus, you always use power for the good of others. You always live your life to serve. The code of the warrior is that greatness is always measured in service. Now, you can serve and other people may not see you as great, but in God's economy, you cannot be great if you do not choose to serve. And wasn't it Martin Luther King Jr. who told us that we can all be great because we can all serve? I am absolutely certain that his philosophy of life was informed by the teachings of Jesus, that greatness comes in service. This goes counter to so much of what's inside of us. I think for many of us, we want to serve as long as it results in a life where we no longer have to serve and can actually be served. When Jesus gives us these juxtapositions of, if you want to be great in God's kingdom, be the servant of all. If you want to be first, then you need to be last. Most of us hear those as temporary situations. All right, I can be last as long as I am certain that one day I'll be first. I can serve as long as I'm certain one day I'll be great. It's almost as if we cannot understand Jesus's framework of reality. We can't understand the way he sees life. He's not telling us we need to be last so that one day we can be first. He's telling us that in God's kingdom, in God's measure, in God's economy, to be last is to be first. He's not telling us we need to serve so that one day we can be great. He's telling us that in God's economy and the way God measures things, that to be a servant is to be great. I remember years ago, I read this illustration of two mountain goats that were at an impasse. One was climbing up a mountain and one was climbing down a mountain. And there wasn't enough room on the trail for them to go around each other, or one of them would clearly fall off the cliff. And after an impasse, after they stood facing each other with horns, pressing against horns, the mountain goat that was on the top kneeled down and lowered itself to the ground, and then the mountain goat that was on the bottom climbed over it and continued to go up. And it's this powerful metaphor that we see even in nature, that if you're in the position of honor, if you're in the highest position, you have to choose to lower yourself and take the lower position. Because if you're in the higher position, then your goal and aspiration in life should be to take those who are lower than you and allow them to use your life as a passageway so that they can rise up and be even greater. What a wonderful reminder about life. If you have the great privilege of having wealth or power or position or influence or fame or celebrity, you should never assume that that's been given to you just for you. Enjoy the life you've been given. Enjoy the wealth and fame and position and power and celebrity God has given you, but never assume it's supposed to stop at you. Your celebrity should be used to make the world better. Your fame should be used to do great things in life. Your power should be used to empower the powerless. Your wealth should be used to be generous and to help those who are less fortunate have more opportunity in life. I think we've misunderstood the generosity and goodness of God. God does pour out his generosity and his goodness in our lives. I think it's inescapable to ignore that there's a truth in this dynamic of prosperity. The problem with our understanding of God's prosperity for us is that we tend to think that God makes us prosperous for us, rather than understanding that God makes us prosperous for others. When we take the posture of a servant, we understand everything we have is simply the resources God has given us so that we can serve the world better. What would happen if all of us took on this code of honor, that we find honor in service, that service is never beneath us, that service of others is never an act of humiliation, it's an act of humility. And when we humble ourselves, that gives God the opportunity to raise us up. And isn't that the promise in the scriptures? That God oppresses the proud and that he elevates and raises up the humble. The warrior serves and allows God to raise them up. You know what? I want to go back and add something. When you look at the scriptures and you read about God, I think sometimes we think the most difficult concepts about God that we have a hard time getting our minds around is that God is all powerful, or God is all knowing, or that God is all present, all the omnis. But I actually think the most difficult concept to wrap your brain around is not that God's all powerful, all knowing, or all present, but that God is a servant. that God chooses to serve, that God is more humble than us, that God is more generous than us, that God is more willing to serve than we are. Imagine a God who creates a being called humanity that can do nothing for you, but you would need to do everything for them. God created the universe for us. God created the atmosphere for us. God doesn't need the water or the air or the food of this earth. He created it all for us. Jesus didn't come to be served by us. He came to serve us. Stop for just one moment and grasp the immensity of this. God created you, knowing that you need him. God loves serving humanity. He loves serving us. He loves serving you. Jesus said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. To this day, God is still serving the world by bringing us life. That for me is so profound, I can barely wrap my soul around it. The warrior finds their honor in service, and that's why God is the one who's worthy of the most honor.